What happens when a respected senator sits down for what should be a casual late-night chat, only to stumble into a late-night ambush so ruthless it detonates the host's image in seconds? In just a few minutes, blistering of raw arrogance from Steven Colbear turns John Kennedy from a cordial guest into a steel-spine defender of principle, and what follows is the most explosive, sensational meltdown ever crafted in late-night drama. John Kennedy stepped onto the stage with that slow, steady stride everyone recognized, calm, polite. The crowd cheered, but behind the desk, Steven Colbear was already smiling. Not the warm welcome, but a smile with knives in it. "Senator John Kennedy, everybody," Steven announced. The claps faded faster than usual. He wasn't giving this guest the usual space to breathe. John sat down, smoothing his tie. "Good to be here, Steven." Steven cocked his head. "Is it? Because I wasn't sure if you'd show up without your scriptwriter from Louisiana." He leaned in. "Or did he fly up with you?" John blinked, but only once. "If you want to go jungle rules tonight," he said evenly, "you should have told me. I'd have worn boots." Steven smirked. "Oh, trust me, you're going to need 'em." They locked eyes. Steven crossed his legs casually. "So, Senator, how long have you been running your Southern folksy grandpa routine? Is it lifelong, or did you pick it up once the cameras started coming around?" John smiled thinly. "Well, Steven, some of us grew up the way we talk others." He paused. "Practice theirs in front of a mirror with a makeup team." A few people in the crowd gasped. Steven jabbed a finger. "Cute, real cute. But I'm serious. You play America's down-home truth-teller, but behind the scenes you're wheeling and dealing like every other politician who says one thing and signs the opposite." John shrugged. "And you pretend to be America's moral compass while your writers hand you every line." Steven leaned back. "Don't dodge. Tonight I'm taking the mask off." John raised an eyebrow. "You want to rip off my mask? Start by picking up a mirror. Yours is foggy." Steven's smile twitched. "Oh, we're doing that?" he said. "Fine, let's talk about you. Career politician, camera-ready sound bites, a whole highlight reel of witty little metaphors. You're basically a TikTok preacher with a Senate badge." John chuckled. "And you're a failed actor who found a desk to hide behind." Steven straightened. "That's funny coming from a man who spends more time on cable news than in committee meetings. Tell me, Senator, do you even remember the last bill you actually wrote yourself?" John didn't blink. "Do you remember the last joke you wrote yourself?" That one landed hard. Steven pushed forward, elbows on the desk. "You love pretending to be the guy who just wants to help folks back home. But behind closed doors, you're just another deal maker who talks folksy so people forget you're part of the machine." John leaned in, lowering his voice. "Steven, don't confuse authenticity with the fact that you've never had it." The entire room tensed. Steven fired back instantly. "Authenticity? Please. Your whole brand is canned charm and Southern seasoning sprinkled over DC politics. You're selling a character, not a person." John tilted his head. "And you're selling outrage because your ratings can't survive on comedy anymore." Steven's jaw flexed. He shot back, sharper this time. "You know, Senator, it's wild watching you pretend to be just a humble Louisiana boy when your staff describes you as a calculating media addict who cares more about sound bites than policy." John smiled slowly, too slowly. "Steven, the day I need life advice from a man who hides behind punchlines is the day I retire." Steven let out a breathy laugh. "You dodged the question." "No," John said quietly. "I rejected the premise." Steven's face hardened. "So you admit it's all an act?" John leaned forward, meeting him eye to eye. "If speaking plainly is an act, then you're right. I'm a hell of an actor, but at least I'm not pretending to be a journalist." Steven's smile vanished completely. "You think you're untouchable?" he asked. "Tonight we're stripping down the myth, the fake charm, the aw shucks lines, all of it." John folded his hands, calm as a man at a fishing dock. "Steven, if you want to drag this conversation into the mud," he paused, "don't be shocked if you're the one who ends up face down." Steven didn't waste a second. As soon as John leaned back, settling into that calm, slow-breathing posture of his, Steven reached under the desk and slapped down a thick stack of papers. Right between them, it landed with a thud loud enough to make a few audience members jump. "Well, Senator," Steven said, voice dripping with performance, "since you're so confident about your real self, I brought receipts." John raised an eyebrow. Not surprised, not rattled, just amused, like he'd seen this trick too many times. Steven started flipping pages dramatically, pulling out highlighted quotes, printed tweets, chopped up interviews from years back, half-truths, out-of-context lines. Frankenstein to create a narrative. "Here's a fun one," Steven said, turning a page so fast it nearly tore. "I believe Washington needs fewer talkers and more doers." That was you, right? John shrugged lightly. "Sounds like me." Steven snapped the paper toward him. "Really, because here, 3 months later, you said, 'Talking is part of getting things done.' So which one is the real you, Senator? The doer or the talker?" John didn't flinch. "Steven, if you're going to stitch sentences together like a ransom note, at least use the right scissors." A ripple went through the crowd. Steven pushed harder. "You don't want scissors? Fine. Let's try something sharper." He reached into the stack again and pulled out a red folder stamped "Confidential." The audience collectively sucked in a breath. John just sighed as if he'd seen this movie before. Steven held it up with 2 fingers. "Inside here is a leaked internal memo from one of your staffers. Says you lean into the Southern charm persona because it polls well." "Polls well, Senator. So all the just folks talk is an act for the cameras?" He opened the folder like he was revealing a magic trick. John didn't even look down at it. "You sure you want to go down this road, Steven?" he asked, calm as marble. Steven smirked. "Oh, absolutely. You ready to admit the act?" John leaned forward just an inch, eyes sharp. "Ready to admit something, yeah." He finally picked up the red folder, flipped it open, then held it up to the camera. "First problem," John said. "The memo misspells my chief of staff's name. Twice." Steven froze. "Second problem," John continued, turning a page. "The formatting's wrong. My team uses single spacing. This is double." Steven opened his mouth. John held up one more page. "And third problem, and this is the fun one, this memo references a meeting on a date I was on live television on your network." A stunned silence hit the room. Steven blinked. Once. Twice. Even the papers in his hands seemed unsure whether to stay still. John placed the folder back on the desk like returning a cheap toy. "You want to play prosecutor?" he said softly. "At least bring real props, not a knockoff from the bargain bin." A few murmurs broke out. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh, damn." Steven's jaw tightened. "Oh, please. Don't act like some enlightened sage. You sell your wise old country routine worse than a community theater actor." John smiled way too calmly. "If I'm the community theater actor, Steven, you're the guy who didn't get cast." The crowd audibly reacted. Steven's face flushed now. Anger, embarrassment, confusion, all tangled together. "Oh, is that what you think?" he shot back. "That I'm some failed performer sitting behind a desk?" John didn't blink. "I think you're trying real hard to turn this into a courtroom, but every time you swing, you hit yourself." Another wave of gasps. Steven's voice cracked slightly as he tried to regain control. "You're dodging. You're dodging the truth." "I'm correcting the lies," John answered. "And judging by that folder, there's a lot of them tonight." Steven's jaw clenched so tight the mic almost picked up the grinding of his teeth. The failed folder stunt still hung in the air between them, and he knew it. He needed to swing back harder. "So that's how it is?" Steven said, voice low and tight. "Fine. Let's drop the props. Let's talk about you, Senator. Because the biggest problem with you isn't your fake charm, it's your hypocrisy." John raised one eyebrow slowly. "Hypocrisy," he repeated. "That's your next card?" Steven leaned forward, hands splayed across the desk. "No more metaphors. No more aw shucks. You talk like you're the straight-shooting guy who says exactly what he means. But you flip your tone depending on the room. You change your language depending on the camera. That is the definition of a hypocrite." John didn't smile this time. He just inhaled slowly, like he was smelling smoke and trying to find where the fire started. Steven, he said, you don't want to have that conversation? Oh, I do, Steven snapped. It's time someone said it. Your whole persona is a costume, one you put on to look authentic, but you're no different from any other politician pretending to be something they're not. A few people in the audience murmured nervously. Then John leaned forward. The first time all night he closed the distance voluntarily. Steven, he said quietly, you're calling me fake? You? Steven blinked. John didn't wait. You spent how many years playing a character on TV? John continued. You lived behind a mask longer than some actors keep a role. You built a career pretending to be someone you weren't, and now you're lecturing me about authenticity. Steven opened his mouth, but nothing came out. John kept going, calm, measured, but sharp as a scalpel. When you performed, Steven, America believed it. They quoted your punchlines like gospel. Half the country thought your character was real, and you didn't correct them. You enjoyed it. Steven's breathing hitched. And now, John said, you sit across from me, asking whether I'm real. He paused, letting the tension stretch like a drawn bow. Ki an dien, kanukshin vau va tuong tat, gioan hoi toi that he dien, an kong te chong te sao. The audience erupted with gasps. A few whispered, oh my God. Steven's face twitched, anger boiling under the surface. Then, without meaning to, he slammed his palm on the desk. The sound cracked through the studio like a gunshot. It was instinct. It was panic. It was the first time Steven's mask slipped all night. John didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched that shaking hand. Then softly, too softly to be anything but lethal, he said, Te run roa Joe, Steven. He leaned back, voice quiet, steady as a heartbeat. Real men don't shake when they tell the truth. Steven snatched his hand back, hiding it under the table. But it was too late. The audience had seen the tremor. They'd heard the crack in his voice. They'd sensed the shift. After the desk slap moment, Steven suddenly straightened his notes like nothing had happened. A classic pivot. A desperate one. All right, he said, clearing his throat too loudly. Let's, shift gears. Policy, infrastructure, education, something substantial. The audience could tell exactly what he was doing, and so could John. Steven forced a smile. Senator, you recently supported a bill on... John's low laugh cut him off, not loud, not cruel, just knowing. Magic trick, Steven? John said, leaning back. You haven't untangled the first mess, and now you're trying to escape into a new topic? Come on, finish one knot before you run from the rope. A few chuckles broke out in the crowd. Steven stiffened. I'm not running, Steven said sharply. I'm talking policy, which is what voters care about. John shrugged. Then talk it straight, not as a getaway car. Steven inhaled slowly, then launched in. Fine. Your record, he said, pulling up a page. You championed fiscal responsibility, yet you voted for multiple spending packages. You've criticized federal overreach, yet supported federal funding when it benefited your state. Which version of you should people believe? John didn't even blink. That's easy, he said quietly. The version with the facts. Steven held the paper up, waving it like a flag. These are facts. John reached forward, gently tapping the page with one finger. No, Steven, that's a list. A list without context. He angled himself toward the audience. You want the truth. When a hurricane tears a path through Louisiana, you vote for the help your people need. That's called duty, not inconsistency. Steven tried to cut in, but John kept going. Still calm, still controlled. And fiscal responsibility, John continued. It means trimming fat, not refusing relief. If you knew anything about governing instead of monologues, you'd understand that. The room hummed with low reactions, soft ooh sounds, shifting seats, people whispering. Steven gritted his teeth. So your position changes whenever it benefits you politically. John looked at him, amused. I change positions when the facts change. You change subjects when the room changes. The words landed like a clean punch. Steven opened his mouth, then closed it again. The audience saw it. John saw it. Steven felt it. John leaned back, arms resting lightly on the chair. There's a difference between evolving and dodging, he said. I evolve when evidence demands it. You dodge when accountability gets uncomfortable. For a few seconds, nothing moved. No one spoke. Even the light seemed to dim under the weight of the moment. Finally, Steven forced a smile. Thin, shaky, clearly manufactured. Well, he said, voice artificially bright, that's one interpretation. John nodded slowly. Yeah, the correct one. Steven knew he'd lost his footing. The audience felt it. John definitely felt it. So Steven went hunting for something, anything, he could use to claw back control. Let's roll a clip, he said abruptly, gesturing to the screen behind them. The studio lights dimmed slightly as a video popped up. A younger John Kennedy appeared on the screen. Speaking in a TV interview years earlier, Steven had cherry-picked a sentence where John talked about supporting a federal program, one he'd criticized in more recent months. Steven folded his arms with a smugness he clearly hoped would carry the moment. Well, Senator, he said, care to explain the inconsistency? The clip ended. Silence. Everyone waited. John didn't rush, didn't frown, didn't even glance at Steven. He just exhaled, like a man amused at a child's attempt to cheat at checkers. Sure, John said calmly. Roll it again. Steven blinked. What? Roll it. John's tone left no room for debate. The clip played a second time, same quote, same sentence. But this time, John spoke over it, slow, clear, confident. That was me talking about emergency relief after floods in my state context matters. Unless you cut it out, which you did. The crowd reacted. Soft gas, a few murmurs, the sound of someone saying, wow. And here's the kicker, John added, pointing at the screen. That clip wasn't even from the year you're implying you trimmed the date off the bottom? Steven's lips parted. He looked at the monitor, then at his papers, as if hoping the truth wasn't written right there in front of him. John leaned back casually. Steven, he said, you're trying too hard. When you cut clips like that, it says more about you than me. Steven tried to speak, but John held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. I'll answer your question, though, John continued. In that interview, I was explaining why federal assistance was necessary after a natural disaster. Later, when I criticized federal overreach, I was talking about bloated bureaucracy. Two different issues, two different contexts. He paused. But you knew that. A ripple of energy went through the room. John then tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on Steven. So tell me something, he said softly. Are you actually searching for truth tonight? Or are you just hoping I slip up so you can turn me into a meme tomorrow morning? Steven froze, not dramatically, not theatrically. Just froze. He swallowed audibly enough that the mics picked it up. The crowd reacted instantly, not loud, not chaotic. Steven was cornered. Everyone saw it. His attempts to pivot, distract, recover, none of it worked. But instead of backing down, he reached for something darker, something desperate. He straightened the stack of papers in front of him, cleared his throat and said, All right, Senator, if you want truth. Fine, I have sources, anonymous sources, from your own circle, who say you're not what you pretend to be, that your whole persona is just a performance to score political points. The room tightened instantly, every back straightening, every eye widening. This wasn't a clip. This wasn't an out-of-context quote. This was a swing in the dark meant to draw blood. John didn't tense, didn't frown, didn't stiffen. He laughed, and not a polite chuckle. A full, warm, genuine belly laugh that rolled across the stage like thunder. When he finally caught his breath, he wiped his eye and said, Anonymous, huh? Steven, that's just a fancy word for doesn't exist. Are imaginary rumors really considered sources on your show now? People in the audience burst into uneasy laughs. Steven blinked fast, like he hadn't expected John to not only dodge the attack, but kick it right back across the table. John leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. You know why anonymous sources are perfect for what you're doing? He asked. Because you don't have to prove anything. Say someone told me, and boom, you get your drama without responsibility. Steven tried to interrupt, but John kept going, his voice calm like he was explaining weather patterns while dismantling a man's career on national TV. And let's be honest, John added, You need drama. You live off it. Scandals, cheap shots, stirring up trouble with guests so people will clip it and share it online. That's your fuel? Steven sat up straight, color draining from his face. That's not. John raised his hand lightly. Steven, you've turned conflict into a business model. And tonight, you figured if you paint me as a fraud, maybe you'll go viral again. The audience murmured, some agreeing, some stunned, all hooked. Then John delivered the line that detonated the entire studio. You ask if I'm acting? Steven, if I performed as badly as you're hosting tonight, I'd have retired a long time ago. It was like someone dropped a match in gasoline. The crowd erupted. Cheers, laughter, even a couple of shocked screams. The noise bounced off the walls, drowning Steven for several long seconds. Steven sat frozen, white-knuckled, breathing sharp, face pale under the lights. John didn't smile in triumph. He didn't gloat. He just watched Steven with an expression that said everything. You swung first, I just finished the job. Steven tried to answer, to regain the room, but all that came out was a stuttered, that's not, that isn't. But nobody was listening anymore. The studio was no longer a talk show stage. It felt like a courtroom, a battlefield, and a confession booth all at once. John rose from his chair, slow, steady, deliberate, not in anger, not in showmanship, but with the posture of a man who decided the moment had come. The audience fell silent, as if someone had pulled a plug from the entire room. Steven looked up at him, eyes wide, unsure whether to speak or brace for impact. John didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He pointed directly at Steven. No touching, no threat, just the unmistakable gesture of a man drawing a boundary in stone. Steven, John said, his tone low and unwavering. You're not searching for truth. You're searching for someone to step on so you can climb a little higher on your ladder of outrage. He took one slow step closer, eyes locked onto Steven's trembling attempt at composure. But the bad news for you, John continued, you picked the wrong man to step on. The audience reacted like a shockwave had passed through the seats. Murmurs, gasps, even a few whispered, "Oh my God!" Steven swallowed, throat tight, and attempted a shaky smile. John, hey, let's just reset, okay? Let's redo the segment. We can start clean. His voice cracked halfway through. It wasn't confidence, it was pleading. John tilted his head slightly, like he was examining an answer on a test he already knew was wrong. A show can do a retake, John said softly, but a man's integrity? A man's backbone? He shook his head. That doesn't get rebuilt with a second take. The audience let out a low, stunned "oh" that rolled through the studio like thunder. Steven blinked hard, the weight of humiliation choking any reply he tried to form. John straightened the button of his jacket, the way a man does before walking away from something not worth fighting for anymore. I think we're done here, he said, and with that, he started toward the edge of the stage. Every head in the room turned with him. Every phone lifted instinctively. Every producer backstage froze. But halfway to the curtains, John stopped. The stillness was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. He turned back towards Steven, one last look, firm as stone. Steven, he said, voice like a hammer dropping, I'll keep my dignity. You keep your script. The room exploded, a full standing ovation. People shouting his name, clapping, cheering, half the audience rising before the line had even finished leaving his mouth. Steven didn't stand. He couldn't. He sat slumped behind his desk, hands trembling, face drained of color, staring at the spot where John Kennedy had just stood like a mirror, reflecting everything he didn't want to see. John walked off stage without another word, calm, steady, untouchable. If this showdown pulled you in, don't let the momentum stop here. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this story with someone who loves a good clash of wit and principle. More twists, more fallout, more truth versus theater moments are on the way. Stick around. The aftershock is coming.